In this video, I will be going over lesson 20, which is about populations and samples. So before we get into that, let's talk about what population and samples are. So a population is an entire group of people, and a sample is a smaller group of people, okay? So say a population could be something like people who live in the US, right? So people who live in the United States, that's a population. A sample, which is a smaller piece of our population, could be something like people who live in Arizona, okay? So United States is much bigger, and Arizona is a smaller piece of that United States, okay? So population is big, including everyone. Sample is smaller, a smaller group of people. Our first question says that a snack food company is conducting a study about their favorite snacks for teenagers in the United States. Which group is the population of this study? Okay, so remember, population is big, right? So since it's big, I want to stick to the United States. And again, remember that we're talking about teenagers' favorite snacks. So all US residents doesn't make sense because that includes kids, adults, elderly, everyone. We don't want that. We want just teenagers. So we want the United States residents from age 13 to 19. Our next question is the same thing. So the snack food company is conducting a study, but now we want to know which group is a sample of the population. So remember, a sample is smaller. So we don't want to go United States because that's too big. Also, Canada, for this Canadian residents, Canada's not in the US. So here we want to go Arizona residents who are from age 13 to 19 because again, we're focusing on teenagers. Our next question says that a researcher is studying insect species in a rainforest and wants to observe their behavior. What is the best way for her to get data for her study? Okay, so she wants to study insects in the rainforest. A says collect all of the insects from the rainforest. B says collect a sample of insects from one area of the desert. Well, that doesn't make sense right away because we're not talking about a desert here. We're talking about a rainforest. C says collect one insect from the rainforest. Well, if you wanted to do a study and you wanted to study birds, right, and you only studied one bird out of the hundreds of different species of birds there are, that doesn't give you a pretty good idea of all the birds, right? It's just that one. And then D says collect a sample of insects from one area of the rainforest. So between our two options left, the first one is collect all of the insects, and the last one is collect a sample of insects from one area of the rainforest. Well, think about if this were you. If this were you and you went to a rainforest is huge, right? Collecting all of the different types of insects that you'll see in that rainforest could possibly take you years. So collecting a sample, so a small little group of insects from that one area, is probably going to be the best way to get a really good idea about how they live, what they do, how they survive, all that good stuff. Our next question says that a production company is studying the television viewing habits of families in Rockville with a town of 5,000 families. What is the most reasonable way for the company to collect data? Okay, so there's 5,000 total families. Obviously, you don't want to survey all 5,000 because that would take you forever. That is a lot of people to try and get a hold of and sample them. So right away, I'm going to cross off this one. I'm also crossing off surveying one family because if you only ask one family, you're not getting enough input, right? One family doesn't really tell you a lot. You need to have a little bit more. So then we're left with these last two that both have us surveying 100 families, but notice how C says we're surveying families in Parkville. But in our question, we are looking at Rockville. So D, surveying 100 families in Rockville, is going to be our correct answer. Now, our next question here says that a study population includes 300 basketball players, 450 football players, and 200 baseball players. Which sample best represents the population? So for these questions, what you want to do is you want to look at the numbers you're given in your original question, and then you want to pick an answer that kind of follows those answers. So if I look here, football has the largest amount, right? Football has the most players. Baseball has the least, and basketball here it's in the middle. So football is on the top, basketball's in the middle, baseball is on the bottom. So when I'm looking at these different multiple choice, I want to pick an answer where football has the most amount of players, okay? If I look at B here, football does not have the most amount of players because baseball has the most, which that's not right because baseball should have the least. And then if I look at C, all of them have the same. And these numbers aren't close enough to where I would say having the same number is okay for my sample. Now looking at these last two here, I go from 90 football players in both. Okay, that's good because that's the most. Now let's look at basketball. On option A, I go down to 60, and then on option D, I go all the way down to 30. And there's not that many fewer basketball lovers, right? So there's 450 football players and then 300 basketball players. So I think that dropping from 90 all the way to 30 is a bit drastic of a drop. So I think D is out. And I'm going to say A here is going to be the best sample that represents my population because 90 has football players is the most, baseball players is the least, and basketball players is in the middle, and they're all relatively within the same. They have a good gap in between the numbers. It's not a huge drastic drop. So again, this question here, we have the same type of problem. It says that a study population includes 1,400 men and 1,400 women. Which sample best represents the population? So here the men and women are exactly the same amount, okay? And when I look at my answer choices, I don't have any that are exactly the same. So I want to pick one that is the closest to having the same amount of men and women. Well, I'm going to cross off C right away and D because the gaps in those numbers are just crazy, going from 13 to 12 and 24 to 140. No, thank you. Looking at A and B here, A is going to be the closest, right? 68 and 72 are much closer together than this 62 and 95. So again, take your time, look at the numbers that you're given in your actual question up here, and find your answer choices that are most similar to those. Oh, one more. Sorry, I thought that was our last one. And this one here, so we have 150 dogs, 75 cats, and 15 birds. So again, birds is the smallest, so I want to pick an answer that has birds being the smallest, which means that C and D are out right away. Now, if I look here, there's 75 cats compared to 15 birds. So if I have 7 cats and 7 birds, I don't think that's a good representation because that's saying that there's about an equal amount of cats and birds in my study. But there's not, right? I have way more cats than I do birds. So that is why this one is out. And B is going to be correct here. So dogs, I have the most of, which is good. Then I have cats, which is second. And then very last, I have birds. All right, guys, that is it for lesson 20. Thank you for watching. Please let me know if you have any other questions.